All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome. This is the sixth and final week of the 2017 installment of the INSAR Summer Institute. I'm Christina Cottle. I'm the co-chair of the INSAR Student Trainee Committee and a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Utah. I would like to welcome you all to this week's session of the INSAR Summer Institute featuring Dr. Nidhi Singhal. Nidhi, are you on the line?
I'm right here. Thank you.
Awesome, perfect. So I'm going to just briefly introduce the Summer Institute series, and then if Deb's able to get on the line, I'm going to allow her to introduce you. But so I first just want to welcome everybody to this week's INSAR Summer Institute featuring Dr. Nidhi Singhal. This is session number 6 of a 6 weeks online series presented by the International Society for Autism Research. We'd like to thank the INSAR Board of Directors for their support in this event. And then I also want to thank the INSAR Student Training Committee for working so hard to put the Summer Institute together. The Summer Institute was designed to provide a forum for the presentation and discussion of autism-related research topics. We wanted it to be accessible for people new to the field as well as old to the field as well. We originally wanted it to be an opportunity for career researchers, like graduate students, or early career researchers like graduate students and postdocs to learn about unfamiliar areas of autism research. But we're really excited that it's kind of expanded beyond just early career researchers to really anyone interested in autism research. We hope that the Summer Institute provides an opportunity for scientists and stakeholders with different backgrounds from around the world to learn from each other and ultimately advance our understanding of autism. All Summer Institute sessions are free and accessible to attend live to anyone who has created a My INSAR account. Sessions will be recorded and available for replay following the conclusion of the entire series. So keep an eye out for emails in the following weeks as we'll open up. We're going to put all the recordings on the INSAR website, and you'll be able to access them there. There'll be more information about how to access them following the presentation. For those of you who have not been following the series, the overall topic for the 2017 INSAR Summer Institute focuses on issues of culture and diversity. And this idea was largely conceptualized from previous Summer Institute participants who provided feedback from follow-up surveys. We really do consider your feedback and really try to work it into all of our initiatives. We really appreciate and encourage any feedback you might have to share with us, and really about the Summer Institute or any of the student trainee events. There'll be an opportunity to submit feedback following today's session as well as the end of the summer as well. So I'm really excited that today our final session in the 2017 Summer Institute features a presentation by Dr. Singhal. During today's presentation, we hope that you obtain a broad overview of the current research and services in India for individuals with autism spectrum disorders, learn about the legislature for individuals with disabilities in India, identify possible ethical risks involved in conducting research with individuals with ASD in low-resource countries, and then gain some knowledge about current genetic, epidemiological, and interventions currently being conducted in India. So before we get started, I want you to know that you can ask questions at any time. There's a little, on the left-hand part of your screen, there's a little question and answer box. Just go ahead and ask your question any time, and then we'll address all the questions at the back half of the session. So put in your questions, and then we will organize them, and then we'll, one of our student training committee members, Deb, will be running our question and answer section, and that's when we'll address all the questions. And during that as well, feel free to ask more questions if you have them. If you want to get some advice about career development topics, please do so as well. That's another one of our goals with Summer Institute is to allow for early career researchers to ask questions about the presenter's career development. So please incorporate those questions as well. Background materials for today's talk containing learning objectives, key terms, such as reading the literature, are all available at autism-insar.org. So as with all the sessions, this session would not have come together without the help of our student and trainee committee member, Deb. I just want to thank her for helping, first of all, prepare the course materials as well as today's webinar. So Deb, thank you so much for your help with this session. And if you're there, I'm now going to turn it over to you so you can introduce Dr. Nidhi Singhal.
Christina, thank you. Dr. Singhal, can you hear me? Is that?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes, I can. Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So Dr. Singhal has extensive experience providing psychological services to persons with autism and their family members. As a PI and co-investigator on several grants, Dr. Singhal laid the groundwork for autism research in India. She helped develop and establish an IRB for Action for Autism, which was critically important to ensure that research on autism in India is conducted with high standards and clear consideration of ethical issues. She also coordinates research collaborations with other institutes and mentors graduate, postdoctoral, doctoral, and students interested in researching the field of autism in India. Her own research has focused on two primary areas: development of a tool for screening, diagnosis, and functional skills assessment in autism, and on a topic of psychosocial support for families of children with autism. Her research interests include studying the sociocultural interplay and its influence on development of and access to services for people with autism, research in the autistic symptomology, building upon screening and diagnostic markers, clinical epidemiology, and the role of culture in the parental experience of autism, and development of parent empowerment programs. She is recognized as an expert on autism by the Indian statutory body responsible for training professionals in India. Her experience with working with hundreds of families gives her an astute grasp on the movement of autism in India. So now I'd like to turn the talk over to Dr. Singhal and her talk entitled Translation of Research and Services Across Culture, Autism Research in India. Thanks for joining us and welcome.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you, Christina, for organizing all of this, for having me here today. And thank you, everybody, for your interest in the talk today. Like Deb said, good morning or good afternoon, based on wherever you are. So for the talk today, first of all, it's rather strange to be doing this without being able to see any friendly faces, but I'm hoping that you're just as excited about this whole trip to India. And the way we've planned the whole hour or so is that I will start with a broad overview of the autism sector in India, which is broadly categorized into 4 sections. So we will be talking about services, training, legislation, and then the research on autism in the Indian context. And what I will try and do is talk about the journey of autism within each of these sectors, and specifically the role that the research activities have played within each of these sectors and how they've influenced or shaped the autism journey in India. I'm hoping that through specific examples, I will be able to demonstrate how especially in a low-resource country like India, research activities and services, they can't be mutually exclusive. They determine each other or should determine each other and shape the entire course of a movement like autism as we've seen in India. Now, some of this information may not necessarily be brand new for some of you, but if you are conducting a research or even planning a research in a country with low resources or a low and middle income country, hopefully this will bring together some things to think about. And having said that, I will start the presentation with some very basic facts on autism, where we are. We're a country of about hello. Yeah. So we are a country of about over a billion, 1.3 billion people. Compared to the U.S., we are 3 times the U.S. population and 1/3 the area. Compared to Australia, we are 2 times smaller, but with an additional billion people in there. And actually, if we compare to Africa, we are nowhere close. We're, I think, 16 times or even more smaller than them, but we have the entire population of the entire continent of Africa in this one country. So we are a large country. We are a very, very big, we are a lot of people together. And what we have is the whole country is divided into 29 different states with their unique culture, unique food, clothes, and even a different language. So we have about 455 different languages that we speak in the country. So although it is like one big country, it's pretty much like a lot of small countries put together, and that's why India is called the subcontinent. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, so this is India. Okay, we have we have a lot of big cities which are comparable to New York or Chicago or any of the metropolitan cities across the world. And these are just the big cities. And as we move away from them, most of India continues to be still rural. And people actually move to bigger cities just to access the basic services like medical and education. The average literacy rate in India is about 74%. And there is less than, I think a little less than 40% of the population continues to live below the poverty line. As in many other countries, there is a huge stigma around people with disabilities. Our census, our survey in 2011 determined that we have 2.21% of people with disability, with just any kind of disability in India. However, that figure doesn't quite seem accurate, and one of the reasons is because of the stigma really that's attached to disabilities in general. Wherever possible, people, especially the family members, try to hide people with any kind of disabilities, not talk about them, and that is because because of the stigma and discrimination. Because the status of people with disability in a country like India is really, really low. So they're really at the bottom of the social hierarchy, and I will talk more about that as we go along. But I think the one thing to take to remember as we go forward is that we're talking about a population which has a lot, which faces a lot of social ostracization and stigma. So autism. Autism has been diagnosed. It's been diagnosed in India since 1960s. But the real focus on this condition has been in the past 20 years or so, which is a lot longer than most developing countries. And the services really began in 1991 with the organization Action for Autism, which is the national organization for autism in the country. Up until then, the condition was considered rare. It was considered a Western disorder, which meant that Indians did not have autism. It happened only to foreigners. So in addition to providing services for interventions, Action for Autism, or AFA as we call it, we also had to work with the medical professionals to facilitate diagnosis of autism in the country. We had to work towards training parents and professionals to create a workforce who will provide those interventions, and to work with the government to get recognition for autism and have the necessary legislation in place. So since then, since we first started in 1991, when we were the first organization, and there was only one school in the entire country which focused on autism, we have now moved to a place. We are now at a place where we have hundreds and hundreds of schools and organizations. We provide a range of services across the country. And although in the initial years, most of the services or programs in the country were started by parents who trained themselves up, now we find more and more non-parents have taken interest in the field, and they've started services, which is fabulous now. In India, unlike in a lot of Western countries, autism programs are delivered via independent autism-specific organizations. This means they could be private organizations, these could be government setups, or not-for-profits like us. But unlike like it is in the US or in other countries, all of these setups are not necessarily a part of a university setup. So these are standalone, independent setups, not necessarily associated with any kind of an academic institution. And the relevance of this I will come to in the course of the presentation. You'll see why this is relevant. So now think about an independent setup, and from there think about the diagnosis of autism. Now in India, a diagnosis of autism can be given by a range of professionals. It could be a pediatrician, child psychiatrist, a psychologist, a neurologist, or somebody else, and they can give the diagnosis based on their independent assessments. Typically, a diagnosis of autism is done using the DSM-5 criteria. Many practitioners, they use autism screening tools like MCHAT or diagnostic tools, especially CARS or ASQ, and in recent years, ADOS has also become very popular. But there are two other assessment tools that have been developed in India. One of them is called Indian Scale for Assessment of Autism, or INSAR, and the other one is Incline Tool for Autism. Both of these tools have been developed in India and are especially used in all the state-supported services, hospitals, institutions. But a part of, one thing to remember in all of this is that these tools are more recently developed. So what was happening for diagnosis all these years? And this is exactly where research comes into play. So as a part of our studies that we have been doing, all the research projects that we have been doing, one of the focuses has been to translate and validate a lot of tools in Indian languages so that the parents or the professionals who are accessing them and the participants, if they are not fluent in English, they can still be able to access. So as a part of different studies, we have translated and validated several tools through the course of these years, and that has in fact set a base for enhancing, facilitating diagnosis in the country. In addition to diagnosis or a diagnostic assessment, an individual with autism will go through several other evaluations. And this is typical like in other countries as well. There could be assessments to assess for hearing impairment, MRIs. It could be to EEGs to assess for any kind of associated conditions like epilepsy. There could be sensory-related assessments, IQs, functional skills assessments. There are standardized set of batteries that have been prescribed by the government that we have to use. So that which tests will be done, which tools will be used, or the associated cost of all of these evaluations, they're all determined by the individual respective practitioner or the organization who is addressing the needs of the individual. To give you an update on where we are, the recent trends that we find in this space, we find that at least in our organization, which is not a reflection of all of India, but just for the families accessing services with us, we find that a majority of children who are coming to us for diagnosis, a very significant chunk of them is coming at an earlier age, at around the age of 3 to 4 years instead of age 5 or 6. So we are finding that the average age is coming down. We also find that there is an increase in the number of families who are accessing services or a diagnostic assessment for children as young as 16 to 18-month-olds. Still not very common, but we can see a gradual and a very steady increase over the years. And these are the kids who then can get early intervention. We find that the children who are coming to us at the age of 10 years or over and above that are the ones who are the more verbal ones or the academically higher functioning ones, the ones who appear to be fairly typical and kind of miss the diagnosis early on. So they're the ones who are coming to us at a later age now when they start to begin to struggle in school setups with their academics, and they're now coming to, they're also reaching us. These are the ones who would slip through the cracks otherwise. And the final trend that we find is that there is a very, very high number of self-referrals from adults with autism who are either writing into us or coming in by themselves to our facilities to basically get an assessment of autism. And these are young people who've been through their lives, usually feeling strange or feeling different from others, but never had a label or a word to explain the difference, nor the understanding of what this difference is all about. So in the diagnostic setup, this is something that we found to be the recent trends that we are experiencing. As far as the intervention goes, a lot of intervention, the mainstream Western approaches, the ABA, VBA, teach or structured teaching, use of PECs, AACs, RDI, they've all come to India, and we have a lot of organizations, individuals who have trained in these programs and are now using these techniques in intervention for people with autism. We also have specific autism-specific schools. We have provisions for individuals with autism in mainstream schools. And although we are mandated by law towards inclusive education, which means that every school, every child can go to any school that they wish to, this is not always implemented, and we find that a lot of schools sort of get away needing insufficient training or infrastructural needs, and therefore not necessarily taking in children with autism. Sometimes when they do take in people with autism, we find that the inclusive education is not necessarily done in the spirit with which it was intended. But what is important to remember is that this is the first step, and it is a small beginning. And now more and more children with autism are being seen in inclusive spaces instead of being hidden away or locked up in isolated spaces. So we are moving towards inclusive education, but we just have taken the first few steps. We're also waking up to the fact now that children with autism grow up to be adults with autism, and they need services too. Now, in the past, I think this is something that is in many countries. We too had missed out. So there are increasingly there is an increasing number of sheltered workshops that are being created, or vocational centers that are being created. But like I mentioned, we are a country of 1.32 billion. We have millions of people with autism with us. So the number of services that currently exist obviously do not meet the needs of every individual that are there. But it's just the beginning that is in place. Once again, I'd like to just give an example of another research that we had done, which was the first adult study that was done in the Delhi and NCR, in the New Delhi, the capital region of India, which was on about 75 adults with autism. And what we did was we spoke to the families. We figured out what the needs of the individuals are, what are they doing, where are they, post their primary education, what's going on with them, what are the needs of the parents and what they'd like to do. And, through the findings of those, of the survey, of the study, we again were able to generate a sort of a draft of a document that we are submitting to the government, which will then determine the course of action for all the services that are needed, basically to impress upon the government the kind of services that are needed for adults with autism as well. So those are things that are in the service domain, which is all wonderful. But there is a slightly, not so positive side as well. Autism is now also being seen now because the autism awareness is increasing. Autism is also being seen as a good business opportunity, which would have been great if it was paired with good services. But at the moment, there is no state monitoring provision, and therefore the quality is often compromised because there is no governance at this point. And and it's becoming a little bit of a situation that is getting us all worried, because we have therapies that are permitted in our country, which are actually not permitted anywhere else. And they found a fertile ground in India because there is no governance at the moment to kind of put a stop to them. So we are trying to figure a way out around this, and hopefully, hello, yeah. So so we are trying to figure a way around that, and trying to moderate the use of medication, use of alternative or unscientific treatments which aim to cure autism. And this is again another place where research becomes it becomes the role of research becomes extremely important to determine what is scientific and what is not. Okay. Moving on to training. One second. Right. So, so for all the disability-related trainings, the government has created a statutory council called the Rehabilitation Council of India, which is a statutory body and which determines which are the different programs that are needed, designs the curriculum, and all of this is done in consultation with the civil society. These training programs are thereafter delivered through the training institutes, which can be usually not-for-profit or other service-driven institutes, but typically they have never been academic institutes like the ones that we're used to in the Western countries. So although this is beginning to happen that an academic institute is delivering an autism program, but at the moment it's not a very popular option, and usually it is done through service-oriented institutions. Now, what is very interesting is that in 1993 was when this statutory body was first established. And it took them about a decade before they decided that autism was a cause worth training for. So even though the government first recognized, the government established the body, the first training program, autism training program in India started only in 2003. Up until then, it is believed that the teaching strategies would be the same for individuals with autism as well as intellectual impairment. Now, for some people, you may wonder why this is happening. Just to give a quick background, up until then, there was absolutely no autism training available to medical professionals either. Now, in India, medical professionals are like God. If they say something, it is like the most sacred word there is. So when the senior, most respected doctors in the country said that they rarely see a child with autism in their clinic, the government believed them. And hence, autism was never considered a priority to invest the resources in. So to bring about this change in 1996-98, we carried out a research study with the pediatricians in India. So about 10,000 pediatricians in India, we approached them, and we assessed their understanding about autism. And we also took this opportunity to train them about autism by distributing a handbook or information material on autism. Now, some of you may be familiar with Dr. Daly's work on this project, but if not, it might be interesting to read how we were successfully able to demonstrate that the limited understanding on the subject of autism, and because of that, we were able to also impress upon the fact that there is a need for autism training. There is a need for autism training in the country. Okay. So what started out as a one-year diploma in 2003 is now a two-year diploma program. We also have undergraduate programs. We also have postgraduate degree programs which focus on autism now. And the students who finish these programs are then government-recognized special educators. Of course, because these are just new programs, there are very few takers at the moment. But you can well imagine that, with the increase in our population, the 5,000 odd special educators can possibly address the need. So to bridge this gap, Action for Autism, and now, this is a movement that we see across the globe. We've been working on parent empowerment programs since 2002, and recently in 2011-12, what we did was we asked for an external evaluation by UCLA, and we evaluated the parent empowerment program to see how successful they can be, to see how impactful the program would be after it's over as well. So we evaluated the program, and we did feel that the results did show that that empowering a parent can be just as the empowering the parent is helps facilitate the whole family development and not just in the child's development. And that was an important feedback from our research work, which just sort of strengthens the need for parent empowerment programs to bridge the gap between the demand and the supply of autism professionals in the country. We also have, as in many other countries, we have the continuing education program, where all the professionals have to accumulate enough credit to be able to renew their exhibition with the government. We have periodic talks, seminars, and workshops. I think in the professional space, it will be safe to say in the professional space at least, that autism is becoming a better-known word. It may not necessarily be as well-known a condition as other conditions, but it's certainly becoming a better-known condition, if not better understood. And we do find a lot of students, not just from the field of psychology or special education. We find students of architecture, we find students of marketing, IT. They're all thinking about autism while designing their products. So yes, a lot of things are happening, a lot of research is undergoing in this field, and it seems to be like a really budding field at the moment in the country. Moving on to legislation, and we've had legislation for disabilities since 1995, and it was called the Persons with Disability Act. But this act did not include autism back then. So to safeguard the interests of individuals with autism and other conditions, in 2000, the National Trust was created, which especially addressed and protected 4 specific groups of disability, which included autism, cerebral palsy, intellectual disabilities, and multiple disabilities. And the trust is formulated some policies, introduced some facilities towards guardianship, towards medical insurance, towards group homes, basically to guard the long-term support, to meet the long-term support for all of these 4 populations. And this is a great way to get autism into legislation at that time, because otherwise autism had no legal status. That was one achievement in 2000 that we were able to advocate for. In 2009, or since 2009, all children have a right to education in school, and this the Right to Education Act has forced schools to at least move towards the idea of inclusion. But like I said before, having the law does not mean its implementation is also being implemented. But it is a beginning, and more children are finding their way into the mainstream setup now. In 2010, a new Persons with Disability Act was drafted, but it was only in 2016, the December of 2016, that it was finally passed. So autism really has had a legal status in India only since December of 2016, when it was finally acknowledged. Now, this has become the primary legislation, and the attempt of the original drafting committee was to make it a more rights-based legislation, have more opportunities for access, have more opportunities for employment, education for all individuals. So it is a big victory for the autism community. But what we find now is that there is a lot of work still to be done, because in these past 2 years, the draft which was originally submitted has been changed, and the civil society and the original drafting committee was not consulted while this was happening. So, unfortunately, some of the changes that have been made were not quite something that we would have otherwise advocated for. For instance, autism has been put under intellectual impairment instead of being a standalone condition, and this is not something that we would have otherwise. That this wasn't something that was proposed or would have accepted. But this is something that we will, we still have to work around. We will figure it out. But the important thing is having come to this place where children with autism and their families actually have a legal status now. A parallel struggle has also been alongside this, has been to get a disability certificate for autism. So like I was saying before, you can get a diagnosis for autism through any of the professionals, but if you want if you want government provisions or provisions which have been mandated by law, you need a disability certificate. You need a certification which will be issued by specific state hospitals or state-supported institutions. So there are specific organizations or state hospitals which will issue a disability certificate. Now, to be able to issue a disability certificate up until 2016, every individual with autism was getting a certificate of intellectual impairment or mental retardation, as it sometimes is still called in India. So, which is not very helpful. But now, with this change in legal status, we're also getting a disability certificate, especially for autism. And the tools that I mentioned earlier, which have been developed in India, have been developed and are being used for this purpose, especially. So all in all, we are in a good place vis-a-vis the law that or the legislation that is in place. We have some great laws in place. We have some progressive laws in place. Now, what we have to work towards is to ensure that it is implemented, not just it's not just on paper, but it's implemented in letter and in spirit. So that's a lot of work cut out for us, and hopefully we will be able to take this forward. Moving on to the ASD research in India. Now, as you may have guessed in all of this this background, the journey of autism has been within the autism sector. It has been towards service generation. It has been towards awareness building. It has been towards trainings. It has been towards sensitization programs. Because even today, even though the professionals are, autism is becoming a common word in the professional space, within the common man, for the common man, a lot of times they do not even know how autism is spelled. Very often people have never heard the word autism. Media has helped in the sense that there have been a couple of Indian movies that have portrayed the characters with autism, so it's become a popular name, a popular word, but it is still does not have the recall value that, say for example, Down syndrome has or intellectual impairment has. So autism is still considered, unfortunately, a little bit of an enigma or still considered rare or a strange condition and not as well known. So most of the efforts have gone in towards creating that awareness, sensitizing people about that, whether it's the common man or the medical professionals, and thereafter the service generation for individuals with autism. Because this is not a part of an academic setup, the orientation of everybody who's involved, especially the key stakeholders, as expected, is very clinical. So even though all of the focus has been very clinical in nature, you would expect that the research has not been as tremendous. And it is true, it's not been as tremendous as a lot of developed countries. However, even in these nascent stages, the published research in India is far more than far more by India than any other developing countries. So in a review of literature that we did in 2012, we found that we had about 167 articles that had been published on autism. The first time that the word was used in India in published literature goes back to as far as 1959. So a lot of work has been done and continues to be done in this space. And while a lot of articles or literature from other countries is usually descriptive, it's in the early stages. In India, the research projects have focused on a lot of topics. These include developing culturally sensitive tools, assessment tools, translating tools, adaptation of tools, conducting epidemiological studies, intervention-based studies, genetics, and everything really that one can think of. And as a national organization, one of our efforts is also, like I mentioned, was to create a base for autism research. So some of our early work also focused on translation of tools and validation of tools. So as a part of this, the studies, we have translated a range of tools, including the ADOS, SPQ, AQ, SPDC, and TQ, and many, many others, including the SRS and SMSS, that in Hindi, at least Hindi language. As a part of this research work, we've also, of course, developed a lot of clinical tools. We've adapted a lot of clinical tools. But in addition to that, research has also been going on face recognition and aspects like using early intervention using information technology or sleep-related studies. So a lot of work, genetics, a lot of work has been going on in all of these spaces as well. I now wanted to move on to some of the risks that are involved in conducting a research in a low-resource country like India. As researchers, we're all very familiar with working with the vulnerable population. We are also very familiar with ethical concerns. And we go through this every single time we send an IRB submission, right? But in India, and this is true for many developing countries, in India, we're not explicitly taught about these in our programs. We're not taught about IRB. We're not taught about ethical concerns, barring a small a chapter or two. We're not even taught about this in our PhD program. Typically, we're not required to submit or get clearances from ethical committees. And wherever required, the guidelines are not as stringent as one would expect them to be. We do have guidelines for by Indian Council of Medical Research, but at the moment there is no mechanism for implementation. So you can well imagine that in the absence of any ethical committees and with limited awareness of ethical practices, there is very little that's going on to really protect the rights of the participants in any kind of research. So if I was to give some, over the next few minutes, I will talk about several examples. But let's start with just the basic premise of voluntary participation, and just think about that. On the one hand, we want to ensure that all the participants are adequately compensated for their time, right? On the other hand, very often, parents have very, very limited resources. So any kind of medical reimbursement, whether it's in cash or in kind, that itself can serve as a huge incentive to participate. And that potentially can be coercive. Now, there are some of these issues that one needs to think about or think through really while planning or conducting any kind of research in a low-resource country. Many of you who are from a developing country or familiar with a developing country or have visited a developing country, you will know that there is very high respect for authority figures. Like I said, medical professionals, nobody can question them. This goes on even more if you are white. And the thumb rule, at least in India, like in many countries, is white is always right. So if you are a foreigner, a white-skinned foreigner at that, please be aware of the inherent power dynamics that can exist in a country like India. So to demonstrate some of the interplay of services and research in a country like India, I want to just showcase some real examples from India in 3 different types of studies: genetics, epidemiology, and intervention. So let's start with genetics. It is the major focus of all kind of autism research across the globe. Now, this is an example or an incident actually which happened at a workshop in Delhi. And there was this discussion on etiology and roles of genes in ASD. And the mother of a teenage son with autism, and she also had a 20-year-old typically developing daughter. Okay, so she stands up and very vehemently says, as it says on the slide, "I wish you people would stop talking about this. Don't you realize that we'll never be able to get our daughters married?" Now, I imagine some of you must be wondering about the connection between causes of autism and a girl's marriage. So, this is exactly the reason why it's important to understand what a common man in India understands about a genetic condition. So first of all, it may not be asked, but it will be assumed that if you're participating in the study, then you have a genetic disorder in the family. And if you have a genetic disorder in the family, then it will just lead to social discrimination. So that's one of the first premise that is already there. Then let's explore the different ways that people understand, at least in India, people understand the meaning of a genetic condition. One understanding of a genetic condition is that it is hereditary, or as it's locally said, it runs in the family. So like in many countries, we still have the system of an arranged marriage and continues to be the norm more than the exception. So amongst one of the things that we consider while matchmaking, one of the things which is a very strong factor is the family lineage. And a genetic condition means a defective lineage. So what do? The families have to either settle for a lesser spouse, and I mean lesser in quotes. Okay, so you settle for a lesser spouse, or you compensate for the disability by giving additional dowry. And in addition to that, of course, you continue to face the criticism and the discrimination, as it was. Another way that we understand genetics is that if it is a genetic condition, that means it is a medical condition. And therefore, what does it require? Medical intervention. So we know lots of families and lots of parents who say that it was rather helpful to participate in the study because all they had to do was go through a blood test, and now they will know the answers about curing their child. And that can be a really dangerous implication or an understanding for the parent. Regardless of their education level, regardless of their understanding, to many parents, genetic disorder implies that the only person who can help me is a good medical doctor. Because it's a medical condition, I need a good medical doctor who will give me the right medicine and make my child okay. And because the awareness levels are low, there will be many doctors who don't know about autism. So what do I need to do? As a parent, all I have to do is look for the right doctor. So we know parents who shop and shop and shop for medical professionals, going from one to another till someone tells them that, yes, I can cure autism. And in India, there are many good doctors and there are many treatments and they will take advantage of a parent's vulnerability. As a genetic condition, we have also established a biological basis for autism. So it's wonderful that we've been able to remove the misconceptions about factors like parental neglect or emotional or it being a psychological condition. It's wonderful. But what happens is that because it is the mom who carried the baby, as a medical condition, a biological condition, the mother is the one who is there to blame. So so in order to have a healthy male heir to the family, what does the father need to do? Just remarry and bear a healthy male child. And that is one of the concerns that we all have while thinking about or considering any kind of genetic study. A final point within the space of genetic research is that in India, this is a lucrative market for genetic testing. It already is. There are laws to prevent female feticide in India. The sex determination during pregnancy is illegal in India. But an abortion is legal if the fetus is found to have a disability. So in the social ladder, disability, like I said, really comes very, very low. And if there is ever genetic testing or prenatal detection of ASD, it will find a way to the Indian market and it will exploit the vulnerability of the population. And when I say all of this does not mean that we should not conduct any kind of genetic testing. And I'm sure these are issues that other countries will face too. But the only thing that we've got to think about, and the whole point of making these points is that we should just be prepared to go above and beyond the usual procedures and understand the culture or the society that we are engaging in. It doesn't mean that we do not get into research. It just means to be aware of the population that we are engaging with. I now want to talk a little bit about epidemiological studies. We know that there is a lot of discussion on the growing incidence of autism, and a lot of emphasis is given on the estimated prevalence rate in each country. And prevalence rates are coming from all countries, and I know that this is the first question I'm asked about India, and I'm sure either you asked this question or you're asked this question about the countries that you've all worked in. But I want to share with you an example of from the life of this boy called Adit. And of course, the names have all been changed to maintain the confidentiality. But recalling, Adit is a 9-year-old boy who goes to a mainstream school, and the parents have not disclosed the diagnosis to the school because they could afford to, keep him in the school because the child did not have any disruptive behavior. In a classroom of 45, he was able to generally fly under the radar. Now, think about Adit and think about the implications of an of him participating in an epidemiological study. Abid's parents had intentionally withheld his diagnosis in the school. Simply why? Because it carried no advantage. Now, as in, if an epi study was conducted in Abid's school, he will be identified. And unlike in a lot of other countries, in India, he would actually lose the services. He might just lose the services that he had because of a diagnosis. We know many, many schools, lots of private schools, who actually refuse admission to children with autism, giving the rationale that they do not have enough provisions for them. And although our law says that children, regardless of their abilities, have a right to education, we know that a majority of the children with disabilities, they do not attend school. They are unable to attend school even today. In fact, in 2010, we had conducted a survey following a soap opera which portrayed a character with autism, and based on our survey about a parental call to this national helpline, which was run for this soap opera, we found that at least 48% of children with autism, they were not attending any kind of school. And with that, with those figures, would it really be fair to children like Adit, who, if diagnosed, would actually end up losing the services instead of gaining anything from the label? Something to think, something for all of us to think about. Another issue that is discussed a lot, especially in India, is diagnosis even necessary when there are no services? So if we don't have any services, or if we don't have enough services for children, should we even identify children then? It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Because on one hand, there will be no services till we've identified children. So should we delay the identification till we develop services? But if we do not have a large enough number, then will it be important enough for the government to really invest their resources if the numbers are really small? And that's a question that we were often asked about, and that was a question that did determine our venture into the epidemiological study that we carried out. One other issue that is also related to epidemiological work, especially relevant in a country like India, was using appropriate screening and diagnostic measures. Very often, the measures are just simple translation of tools which have been developed in Western countries. And because it does not keep into account the cultural adaptation, very often they can either underestimate or overestimate the actual prevalence. And that's something that one needs to be mindful of as well. So there really is actually no particular way to know whether a new diagnosis will bring good or harm. But definitely there is a need for all of us as researchers to consider and resolve this issue before we initiate or engage in an epidemiological study. And one of the things that really might be helpful would be to collaborate with other service providers, to build capacity, engage in training programs, so that the interventions may be coupled with identification. Moving on to intervention studies. Now, we're all familiar with intervention studies. We are all familiar with evaluation or evaluating the efficacy of any particular treatment program. And sure enough, in a landing country like India, there is a very strong need to, increase intervention studies to figure out what is scientific and what is not. Now, one of the things to consider is perhaps to remember that parents of children with disability in any of the low and middle income countries, they often have access or very limited access to appropriate intervention, either because it does not exist or because demand far exceeds the availability, like I said before. Now, in a country where many children with disabilities receive no intervention, we have to start with a set of assumptions and precautions which are mindful of that. What I mean by that is, think about, this is an example from a blog on a real website. So Amit was receiving stem cell therapy using bone marrow stem cells and showed 88.3% improvement for autism. And this is way back in 2009. And this is right after the first shot. Now, if this is the kind of stuff that happens in a country, we just need to be, we just need to be mindful that parents might just be very desperate to receive some kind of services, and they may just participate in a research project without any regard to its efficacy or its safety, only simply because an intervention is available. If a parent has the intervention alternative, it may not be surprising that they will agree to enroll in a research study like stem cell therapy, which unfortunately is a very popular form of therapy in India. It might be useful to also consider that recruitment through schools may also be especially be coercive for some parents. Because once again, the parents may feel that, like I demonstrated before, that they may just feel that refusal to participate may antagonize authorities, and they may lose access to services that they have, whatever little it is. One consideration that we feel is rather important is that given the limited understanding of the concept of research, many parents interpret it as that if a particular treatment program is being studied, it is because the treatment is effective. So it's almost like research legitimizes a treatment technique just because it is being studied. So these are some of the things that I thought might be useful for all of us as we as we explore research in another country or another culture as well. So where do we go from here? Certainly, by no means do I mean to suggest that we should not be conducting studies or research in any of these countries or in another culture. All this means is that when we do carry out any kind of research, it is important to find out the context of any condition, autism or anything else, within that culture. And one way to do that would be to, read about health research, because some of these issues may have already been done, but more significantly, establishing collaborative partnerships with existing agencies. It is important to talk to people who are engaging with the key stakeholders, with the individuals with autism or the family members or anybody in their ecosystem, because they have the pulse of the sector. They would know what would truly be meaningful in the lives of the key stakeholders. They would understand the whole concept of applicable research, and they would understand what a meaningful outcome would really be. Something that does not happen very often, but would be useful to happen, would be a partnership which is based on that I'm an expert on research, you're an expert in your culture, and the participant is an expert on autism or living with someone with autism, and we all work together as equals. It is then through such dialogues and interactions that one arrives at the relevant topics, understanding what is really, truly relevant in that culture, devise practical methodologies to approach the situation, engage in development of appropriate measures for assessment, and finally arrive on outcomes. While deciding the research priorities, especially when we are working with low resource countries, I know in India, everything else has a priority. And every other concern takes precedence over autism especially. So in India, we have poverty, we have education, we have Save the Girl Child, we have HIV, we have cancer, we have use of tobacco, polio, and so on. Even within the disability sector, autism really makes it at the bottom of the ladder. So what does it end up being? Less priority, less attention, and mostly it ends up in people with autism being viewed as lesser human beings with fewer rights, which is not okay. So once we do decide, it's important to engage the resources that we have in really truly applicable research, which will really make a difference to the lives of the people who are involved in it. And then to come back and share the results with the participating agencies, the participants. Let them know what happened, which is not something that is done very often. We think about informed consent, but we don't usually think about communication of results, and which can be really a very demotivating. It can be very demotivating for parents who spend all their time in research activities, and they end up feeling there is no personal gain. So what the hell? Why do we need to really contribute to science and research? And finally, I would like to end at the point where really I started with. The research has to translate into service. It has to translate into policy. In many countries, there are no policies around this. And research can have a really powerful impact on policy making, on the practices in the country, and really, as we've seen in India, has the potential to change the climate of autism in that study. So I think as researchers, it becomes an even greater responsibility for all of us to ensure that the focus and the process of research is meaningful in the cultural context as well as in the context of the lives of people we are researching. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Singhal, for a great presentation. We're going to jump right into the question and answer session. So we do have a couple questions for you that have come through while you were speaking. There were some specific questions about services in India. So for people who are looking to move back to India for family support factor, where do you start when looking for schools, and how do you find board-certified therapists? Are there websites where they can find therapists or technicians? Do you have any thoughts on finding services?
Sure. Unfortunately, in India, like I mentioned before, there is no provision for state monitoring to govern the quality of services, whether as an individual or professional. We do have a list of services or organizations on our website. We do have a database of that, but it's not a recommendation. But the best way to do is talk to parents and then use your judgment, which is why the parent empowerment programs are super important, because as a parent, I know I have trained myself. I can figure out I don't need a board certification then. All I need to know is whether I will have the skills to determine whether this is a therapist worth investing in, or it's a scamster just by the interaction. One of the pure giveaway is if the child, the individual, is actually avoiding the therapist, I would never push the person in. So that would be the greatest marker to determine whether or not a therapist is worth your child's time.
Right. So kind of going along on the service providers, even in the U.S., we have difficulty adequately training service providers, and there tends to be a lot of turnover in programs that provide intervention services. Do you see similar challenges in India? Can you speak to the challenges in providing service to children with ASD in India?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Oh, I'm sorry, I might have cut out. So said I'm talking about the difficulty in turnover in programs that provide intervention service for staff, and so providing adequate training services for these providers. Do you see those similar challenges?
Yes, yeah. There aren't enough adequate services, training opportunities. It's just beginning. There are very few good therapists, and because they're good, they're already super booked. The other thing is that autism is also something that we're all understanding in recent years. So up until now, autism was just thought of as in India, it was the Scanner style typical severe sort of condition. It was not looked at from the perspective of ability. So even though we know there are loads of these high-functioning young people who are out there who can become great advocates, unfortunately, given the stigma, they all try and they're all hiding, and they don't want to be the ones who are disclosing their diagnosis, who want to come out in the public and say that, yes, I have autism and this is what autism means. Like we have across the globe, we have such strong self-advocates. We don't have them in India only because of the stigma that exists, because they are then shunned away by the families, they're shunned away at workplaces, they're shunned away from their college, and they don't want to disrupt the life that they have already created for themselves. So it's difficult for them. And that is one of the reasons why the training in autism is not as powerful as it can be. It has a scope. But yeah, I mean, we do have a lot of training opportunities now, and we just have to make the best of it.
Right. So you did talk about some of the tools that have been translated so that they can be used. We have a question about how can we get access to those validated translated tools. But then there's also a follow-up question is, can you give some names and a little bit more details about some of the screening measures that were developed for and translated? So I guess the question is, where do they get access, and then if you could talk a little more about them.
Right. Sure. So one of the measures, the screening tool that was translated is MChat, which is a free access tool and can be accessed from their website by the authors. Since it is a free tool, I'm happy to circulate that around. I will have the permission to circulate that around, but it will be available on the MChat website. For the other tools, unfortunately, because there are paid tools, we will need to go back and contact the respective publishers or the authors to be able to get access. But any free tool is fine.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if I missed it, though, but we have specific questions for the names of the tools for screening. Is that provided in your slides?
It is provided.
The specific names for okay.
Yeah. So the screening tool is MChat that we've done. I've just put on the slide again. But there are all these other. There is another screening tool, which is a 10-question, which is a general disabilities screener. But the other are autism-specific questionnaires, and we can get access only through the authors or the publisher.
Great. Let me see. So you did talk a lot about the ethical guidelines being of concern for autism research. Can you talk to any recent progress towards developing these guidelines a little bit better? Who could be monitoring this research, and what other protections do you think need to be included?
Right. So unfortunately, there are no ethical guidelines that have been written down. Even now, we have so when we first started formally in the research as a research department, we did set up the IRB for our organization. But once again, the ethical guidelines are usually the ones that are given in the U.S. Given our understanding of the cultural context, say for example, the intervention-based studies are not the usual studies that we engage in. Biomedical studies, again, are not the ones that we kind of directly participate in, but we know of several people who are doing that. We can't possibly, they all have their own individual set of guidelines that they can or not adhere to. So there is very little legal or ethical governance that is currently on play, which is why it's important as researchers, if we can just be mindful of some of these aspects. I think it's important to do that even when there is no external guidance or government there is, to kind of force us to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so we also have a couple questions about stigma and associated with autism in India. Do you know of any studies that have attempted to decrease stigma among families with children with autism? And if so, what have been some of the outcomes?
We know that stigma is something that has come up. I'm not familiar, at least I can't think of any specific study in India which has on autism which has spoken about stigma, although I'm pretty certain there might be. And but there is a lot of research work that is going on now, and I definitely may have missed out on it. But I know stigma has been spoken about in other contexts, in other conditions, and yeah, it is what it is. So I'm not sure, like in terms of outcomes, what would there be, but stigma is it is there, and we see it in our everyday lives as well as in research. So,
right.
I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
no, I think hopefully there'll be more studies that focus on that. It seems to be an important area of research that needs to be explored. So we do have a question about gaining diagnosis. So you mentioned the difficulties with gaining a diagnosis in areas where there are no access to services. Do you think there is a potential for reallocation of professionals, such as a more focus on intervention than diagnosis? The commenter also commented that they were finding this very difficult in the Middle East. We have a lot of educational psychologists, but not enough of the speech and language to implement their recommendations.
Your voice is muffling up. I couldn't understand the bit at all.
Okay. Hold on. Let me try that again. Can you hear now?
A little bit better, yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned the difficulties with gaining a diagnosis in areas where there's no access to services. Do you think that there's a potential for reallocation of professionals, such as a more focus on intervention than diagnosis? And the commenter said that they're finding this very difficult in the Middle East, where they have a lot of educational psychologists, but not a lot of your speech and language, ABA, people to implement their recommendations.
Right. Yeah, we have that all the time. We face the same thing a lot of time. Reallocation of professionals, sure. See, in India, we cannot afford to be super specialists, and I imagine it will be the same in the Middle East. So it would be the same professional who will need to learn about autism and the diagnosis along with the intervention. A lot of again, in such situations, wherever possible, we train. Like, so for example, in India, our education psychologists or special educators / ABA therapists, all of them also need to learn about, say, sensory integration or occupational therapy, or at least the basics of that, because in many, or even speech therapy or elements of that, because a lot of because we would not have the resources for having specific special educators, a specific occupational therapist, a sensory integration therapist, and have a team of speech therapists as well. So one person has to learn a lot of all of these skills and learn to use them with specific individuals, because other than that, we would otherwise just limit the intervention that can be done with children. The other thing that we are now also focusing on, especially in countries where there is very limited access to services, is using IT to at least start the early intervention program. So there are a lot of these tablet-based intervention programs which a parent can learn and then implement at home. And these are people who have the resources in terms of money, but they do not have access to services. So they can afford a tablet and they can afford to buy an educational program if it is for sale, and they can use it in the comfort of their house and travel periodically to kind of learn about how to go further. So that's something that we're also exploring.
And so the next question kind of related to that was, is there a role for psychologists in the way to diagnose, treatment, and consultation is carried out in India? It sounds like medical professionals are the only ones who do it right now.
No, so that's not the only one. They did include not medical professionals, also psychologists can.
Okay.
So even though education, but in India we do not have further subdivision of educational psychologists versus rehab psychologists versus something else. If they're psychologists and if they are in a medical facility or a special needs facility or a school-based teaching facility, and if they can make a diagnosis, what they will need to do is they might need to refer the family to a government setup to get a certification, a further certification, in case the parent wants to access the provisions by law. But other than that, it's got to be, we just train only that many professionals. We got to have a larger training program, which does include, we strongly recommend a larger training program, which includes elements of ABA and elements of other programs, so that one professional is able to learn and deliver something, because training one professional is difficult enough right now. Having a multidisciplinary team is something that we can just dream about right now.
Mm-hmm. Right. I just wanted to kind of switch a little bit for our questions. And as you know, a big focus of these summer institutes is for early career researchers to hear about the research that's going on. And so we like to include some questions about your career training. And so I just wanted to start by asking you a little bit about your training trajectory, particularly what type of grad school did you attend? Did you do a postdoc, any early funding that helped launch your career beginning, so where did you start when you got into this field?
Right. So when I got into the field, I did my graduation and my post-graduation in psychology and clinical psychology, and then I trained as a psychologist, did some diploma programs back then, and I graduated a long time ago. So back then, there were no autism-specific training programs that had been introduced. So I just got really lucky, I think, and I got involved with families who had kids with autism because I was volunteering with them. And that's how I learned about autism, through parents. I learned about autism through people with autism. And it was much later that a training program came along, and that's when I learned about autism as well. I did my PhD a few years later. Once I had been in the field and fallen in love with the sector, that's when I decided to do my PhD in autism. All my education has been in New Delhi from one of the best grad schools here, or one of the best universities in India. And but unfortunately, I was never taught about autism in my psychology classes, or whether it was graduation or post-graduation. I was never taught about autism in the. I do not even, in fact, remember if the word was ever uttered. So we were never taught about that in our coursework. So it was through working and volunteering on the job with specific families and organizations that I learned about autism. I have not yet done postdoc, but I've done loads of research post-PhD program. But in India, it's the academic system is slightly different from the US-based systems. And when I did my PhD, which was many years ago again, there were no funding opportunities. There were no opportunities like that. So now I understand there is a lot more that's going on. There are fellowships and there are scholarships and there are opportunities for internships. But when I did that, there were just opportunities to volunteer on as and when basis.
Can you speak to some of those opportunities? So the funding mechanisms, what would you recommend to advance young careers, especially on that international level?
Right. So Fulbright scholarship is one of the, I think, really something that I do recommend very strongly. We have had a lot of Fulbright scholars who come to India and done the autism research or other researches, and it's a great way to learn about a culture as well as I think it just sets your foundation for the preliminary work. I think there are all of these government specific, what's it called? Like I know that there are specific country partnerships, and those would be the way to explore, I would think. Like I know that in India there are all of these travel grants and all, but more importantly there are tie-ups with specific countries. So India, Japan, for example, or India, US, for example, or I know there are tie-ups with India, Australia, India, Israel, where there are opportunities for doing research at various levels of your career. So I would think that the best way to go about it is exploring what your country provides.
Okay. And I think you might have just answered the next question that I had for you, would be just what would be foremost advice do you have for early career scientists in our audience that are interested in following that similar career path as you did, especially, internationally, but also specifically to low-resource countries, and so they want to pursue that type of research. But I think you did just really talk a little bit about, but if you have any other advice towards that, that would be great to share.
I think, I just follow the advice that I think I apply in my life, which is to really think about the kind of impact you want to see, you hope to see, understanding your reasons to become a researcher or a scientist. What do you hope to achieve with all the work that you do? What do you essentially, like I know that when I did my PhD, one of the questions for me was, what did I hope to do after the end of my PhD? What was I looking for? Was it a degree? Was it a title of PhD or a doctor in front of my name? Or was it a hardbound thesis or a dissertation? Or what was it that I really wanted? I know that for me the answer was what it would do to the lives of people that I'm working with. So at the time when I did my PhD, we did not have stuff in India. We did not have access to internet. There were no journals that were coming in. I could not even put together 2 pages of review of literature for my synopsis at that point to put in a proposal for doing my work. It was so bad at that point. I could have let that hinder me, I was advised at various stages to not pursue this project only simply because how would I ever complete it? If I can't find two pages of review of literature, how the hell do I expect to write a full dissertation, identify participants, and so on? So for me, the answer was, if it's so difficult for me, what would it mean to the lives of people who have children with autism? So what's happening to the parents? And that was what governed that's the question that's governed my career trajectory. So when I'm looking at a research, it has to be applicable. It has to make a difference to the lives of people I'm working with. So I think you just got to be creative. You've got to dare to innovate. You've got to follow the principles of science, but also, be open to deviating from the paradigms of conventional research. And I think that's how the whole field of qualitative work, the whole field of mixed method work, that's how the parent empowerment programs, that's how they were all started. So, that would be my thing.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. Just one more question is about service responsibilities. So what other service responsibilities, so teaching committees, national organizations, have you found to be helpful to be involved in for the advancement of your career in general? And if there's specific ones, how did you know to get involved in them, and how did you go about getting involved with them?
Right. Yeah, I mean, really, in India, we did not have the resources to get access to a lot of these committees. And I know amongst all the things that I've done, INSAR, the conference, is something that I've always looked forward to, because that was an update. The cultural committees, the diversity luncheons, the opportunity to talk to people and figure out what's going on and learning from my colleagues, the peers, has been the best way to kind of move further. I think forums like these are a great way to dialogue. And really, I've been super lucky to have lots and lots of good mentors, because perhaps because I was very clear on the kind of mentor I was looking for or something, but really I was really lucky to have good mentors. So just be open to learning from other cultures especially, and I think that would be the way that could really enhance the career.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for answering all these questions and providing such a great presentation. So I'm going to turn this back over to Christina, who can wrap this up for us.
Thank you both so much for running the question and answer section, and then Nidhi Singhal for your presentation. We're going to end a little bit early today. I think we had a great discussion, and you provided such good knowledge about how things, kind of the historical perspective of getting the services and research up in India, and I think it provides a really good example for other countries, but as well as those who maybe want to work other researchers in India, and kind of give us, from like the U.S. especially, a perspective of how things got started there. So thank you so much, Dr. Singhal, for your presentation. Deb, thank you for all of your help with today's session and running the question and answer section. This will actually conclude our session for today, as well as for the whole Summer Institute for 2017. We're going to have video replays available on the INSAR website in the next couple of weeks, so keep your eyes out for emails. If you're registered, you'll get an email letting you know when the video replays are available. If you just created a profile on the INSAR website to register for today's talk, there are many benefits if you choose to join INSAR as a dues-paying member. You can become an INSAR member by visiting the membership page of the website. I really encourage you to do so. If you have any questions or want to get more involved, you can contact the Student and Training Committee at studentcommittee@autism-insar.org. Again, it's studentcommittee@autism-insar.org. We're always looking for more help and for people to get more involved with our committee. We hope that you enjoyed this last session of the 2017 INSAR Summer Institute series. Please take a few moments to fill out the comment section after you end your session. We're really eager to hear your feedback. We also will be sending out a survey in a couple of weeks to get more feedback, more specific feedback, that is. Thank you all who listened today and participated, and as well as those who participated throughout the summer. We hope to see you at both the INSAR regional meeting and annual meeting. Please look for student training members at both events. Thanks so much, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Singhal and Deb.